Content warnings for this episode include depictions of incest in the film, discussion of cults, abusive relationships, and violence in relation to the film.
Greetings. You are listening to Horror Nerds at Church, a podcast where we take a deep dive into a horror film and talk about what it can teach us about God, the Bible, and each other. My name is Joe, and I am the undecided grad student of this podcast who will later on steal Pace's thesis idea.
Oh, hey. Um, we can fight over our thesis idea, just like some of the characters in here. I'm Pace, by the way, and I am a person inside of a bear suit, or at least that's what I'm told every time I go to DC's Bear Bar. But
Yeah, I think DC's vision of that might be a little bit different than what they have up in northern Sweden.
well, I am told that I'm smoking hot, so
Well, yes,
just
you
like
are.
that, just like Christian was at the end of the movie. He was definitely
Yeah,
smoking and hot and
yeah,
in
yeah,
pain.
well, yeah, that he was literally. So, what's new, Pace? Any announcements? Any anything you want to share?
Let's see. Well, this is our first of our kind of one-off episodes post Halloween. So we are
Right.
doing Midsummer. We'll talk more about that in
Hmm.
a little bit, but it's exciting. So we're doing 5 kind of one-off films.
Yeah.
Beyond that, what has been going on recently? I don't know. There's something I wanted to say. Oh, that's what it is. I've been watching the Conjuring films, um, the Conjuring universe, in preparation because they just released The Conjuring 3 called The Conjuring The Devil Made Me Do It on HBO Max as part of like Warner Brothers releasing everything simultaneously in theaters and on HBO Max. And so I was watching all of them for that. And first of all, we definitely need to do this for one of our seasons for the podcast because the films are chock full of religious imagery. But two, I was kind of researching about the real life Ed and Lorraine Warren, and they are kind of not good people, it seems. So that'll be interesting if we go down that road with The Conjuring to maybe talk a little bit about the real life Ed and Lorraine Warren and compare it with the film. Because in the film, they're like lovely people. Patrick Wilson and was Vera, I don't know how to say her last name, Formagia or something of that. But they're lovely in the film, but in the films, but real life, he was like anti-Semitic. Oh my god, all sorts of shit. It's just not good people. And also, a lot of their stuff was turned out to be hoaxes. So I think that'll be a fun season. What about you, Joe? What have you been up to?
Well, that sounds like it's going to be an interesting season. I'm definitely down for conjuring a series of conjuring episodes. So for me, I have discovered, I think I'm going to date myself here, but I have discovered the great novelty of purchasing movies by streaming. So, what's the surprise there, right? Netflix is everywhere and we all watch it. But like it's a different thing to own a movie, which I don't know about you, Pace, but I feel like people don't know that feeling anymore because you can just stream whatever now as part of a subscription package. And
Hmm.
so, back in our day, you could own a movie. You could go to the store and you could buy the DVD or the 2 disc special edition or whatever. There used to be this mall chain called, I think it was called Sunset Motion Picture Company. Anyone
Yeah.
remember that? Yes. And so what they would do is they would take movie reservations and then they would throw in like a special deal with the movie reservation, like, if you reserve your movie now, you would get like a poster or something. Oh yeah, and so
Hmm.
you had to pay, prepay for your movie, but not only were you guaranteed the movie, but then you got like something extra, and so like that is not a thing anymore in our streaming era. So for Midsommar, by the way, it's Midsommar because I
Hmm.
was watching Ari Aster in an interview, and that's the way he was saying it. So for this movie, I screened the theatrical release with you, and then I decided to catch the director's cut, which has an additional 24 minutes of footage. And the only provider that was selling that, it was exclusive to Apple. So I bought it. And interestingly, when you purchase a movie through Apple and and when it's attached with special features, uh, they put a menu on it the way you would see in a regular DVD back in the day. So it's just an interesting experience to see how the joy of owning a movie has like become so modern now. You don't have to go to the store and put in a reservation anymore. You literally just with a couple of swipes of your phone, you can own the movie. So yeah, I had the good fortune of seeing the director's cut of this movie, and the bonus features are really interesting too. Hence why I know how to pronounce the title of the movie.
Yeah, but apparently not Ari Aster, who I believe his name is Ari, not Ari, as you said.
Oh! I stand corrected. I stand corrected, Ari.
Love it. So yeah, that surprised me because I've long wanted to see the director's cut. I've done a lot of reading up on it and stuff because I
Mhm.
spoiler alert, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I absolutely love this movie, and but I knew they released the director's cut in Blu-ray format, but it was $50 like special edition, and it's like I would be
Wow.
willing to spend it because it came in this like gorgeous case with like photo like a photo book and all this stuff, so it's
Mhm.
totally worth the money in my book. But it's like I also don't have $50. I'm a grad
Right.
student. It's like
Right.
that's a lot of money. So I did not realize that one could buy it digitally, but then Joe told me that
Yeah.
it was available on iTunes, so now I definitely want to get that. But so hopefully I can see that sometime soon. But Joe's going to be our resident director's cut edition person for today, kind of like I was for the one Rob Zombie movie.
Yeah, but you know what, Pace? I think I should say up front that the additional 24 minutes of footage don't change the movie a whole lot. The most significant difference is, and we'll go into detail about this later, is one important scene um, that I don't know, depending on how you feel about the movie as it was released into the theaters, it could be take it or leave it situation, you
Mhm.
know? So,
Interesting. Yeah. Um, so what about so of course we're talking about Midsommar. You can also say it Midsummer. A lot of people say it that way.
yes, yeah.
Ari Aster has said that he doesn't mind if people say it that way, but like Joe
Mhm.
said, Midsommar is the pronunciation he himself uses.
I
It
think
came
I'm
out
gonna
in
say
20.
mid. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to say I think I'm going to say it midsummer because I am a savage American who clearly doesn't know how to speak other languages and rudely interrupts his co-host. Continue.
No, no, it's all good. So it came out in 2019, directed by Ari Aster, who is most famous for Hereditary, which is
Mhm.
another kind of art house horror film similar to this that came out a few years back. And then he's done quite a few short films. One that's noticeable is A Strange Thing About the Johnsons, which I've seen. You can find it online to watch it, and it's a really dark kind of horror film that talks about a family going through like some incest issue like between the father and son. And it's just really the son, unlike in the son is kind of the instigator of the incest here, and it's just a really weird kind of dark creepy movie, but at the same time like really well done for a short film. So it's just so if that
Mhm.
kind of interests you, definitely look that up. But just know, of course, all the content notices and warnings before you watch that, because it
Mhm.
kind of does not shy away from confronting some of that. But that's the only one of his short films I've seen. But I know he's done quite a few.
How
Uh,
Pace? How do you watch that? Is it available on streaming or?
I I don't remember how I've seen it. Quite honestly, I think I don't think it's on YouTube, but it might have been like released to Vimeo or something. So maybe that's where I saw it.
Well, this
I'm
is
not 100%
interesting.
sure.
I I don't know if Google is becoming the Matrix or what, but I started typing in the title of the movie, and it auto completed the title of the movie as if it were expecting me to be looking for this movie.
Yeah. So, very interesting movie, and kind of already like that movie I think came out like, or the short film he did like 10 years ago or so. So already,
2011. Yeah.
oh yeah, so already there's, you can kind of see he has a really great eye for film directing and direction and stuff, but also a really good way of one of the things I think we're going to talk a lot about in this movie is just creating this really like tense and atmosphere for a film. So that you can see that already in that movie. So what were your
Huh.
first memories of this film?
Of Midsummer?
Yeah.
So again, marketing did a really great job, and I saw posters of it. Actually, no, 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 no. The trailer was attached to some other art house film that I went to watch that I now can't remember. Um, but I know it was an art house movie because I went to one of the landmark theaters, and when I saw the trailer for Midsummer, I honestly have to say I wasn't interested in seeing the movie. It kind of looked like a bunch of white people in a dire situation, which is really boring. So yeah, so yeah, that was my first experience to Midsummer and seeing the poster just about everywhere. How about you?
And so then this watching it for the podcast was the first time you've seen it then, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, when I
Yeah.
when I watched it with you.
So for me, I remember I saw Hereditary in theaters, which is, like I said, Ari Aster's kind of first big. Well, it was his first feature length film, but also a huge breakout film. It got a lot of press and a lot of people saying it's one of the most scary movies ever made and all that stuff. And I will say, the movie's plot makes no damn sense if you've seen Hereditary, but it is nonetheless like a very chilling film that like after I left the theaters I was just like shaken by that film. uh
So I saw that movie not in the theaters. I saw it when it made its Amazon Prime debut. I Maybe I was just in a mood pace. I don't know. I didn't like it. I thought that the pacing no pun intended. I didn't I thought that the pacing was just not there. Ugh, the performances were not good. Tony Collette, who I love and everything, managed to salvage that a little bit, but I think after watching Midsummer and having a positive reaction to it, this might be the impetus I need to maybe revisit Hereditary. But the first time I
yeah,
saw it, wasn't a fan.
I think part of it, like I said, the plot doesn't make any damn sense, but for me seeing it in a theater really, and I went by myself too because my husband, as I've said a few times on this podcast, doesn't really enjoy horror movies. So I went to the Emery Bay Street theaters by myself, like a midday showing, and it was, I just like that whole experience of seeing it in theaters was just like very I just kind of left the theater kind of like chilled about it and kind of like unable to stop thinking about it for a few days. And so when they were announced Midsommar, and started to see the advertisement for that and saw that it was directed by the same person as Hereditary, I knew I wanted to see it. The problem is it was released in June of 2019, which is when Matt and I were driving across the country from California Bay Area to Maryland.
Mm. Mhm.
So it did have a long run in theaters, but just like kind of getting set up on the East Coast and trying to get employment and stuff and money figured out kind of took a long time. So I didn't, unfortunately, never got to see this in theaters. But when it was released on Amazon, I purchased it before it was even on Prime. Because I knew I wanted to see the film, so I do own the film digitally, but not the director's cut because I didn't buy it on iTunes, of course.
Right.
But so I watched it and I was obsessed with the movie. I just think this is a very very well done film, um, and
Mm.
so I'm kind of interested because Joe. did not have Joe. I think you. It's safe to say, you can correct me if you're wrong, that the movie was very thought provoking to you when you saw it the first time, but you kind of were on the fence about how you felt about it because it was very strange. But upon second viewing, you said you seemed to like it more.
See, yeah, I mean, for the most part, you're correct. The thing is, uh, in terms of thought provoking, I was surprised by how theological it was. I mean, I know we are doing this podcast to watch horror movies through a theological lens, and so far with the Halloween series, we've been able to do that really well, which actually surprised me. uh, but with Midsummer, there were so many theological things I was pulling from it. But on the whole, though, after that first viewing, I was just really uncomfortable, and I don't know how to describe that discomfort. Like, was I uncomfortable because it was such a good horror movie? And I think the answer to that question is yes. It definitely evokes horror. and
Yeah.
so and so if that's the point of the horror movie, then Midsummer did that job. Second time around, obviously since I saw it the first time, I have a little bit of emotional distance, and I was really able to appreciate it better, and I got over the hangups I had for that first film, that first viewing. Hmm.
Mm, very, very interesting. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to talk more about this film, especially when we get to the rating it, because I don't
Yeah.
think you and I have clued each other into where we kind of fall on that yet. So I'm
Yeah.
curious. But the only other thing I'll say about my first memories of the film is that so after I watched it the first time, I think I watched it with a friend through like watch party or Netflix party, whatever it's called, that kind of setup the
Hmm.
first time. But then I went back and I loved it so much, I like the next day I rewatched it like by myself. And then like I think a month later, I finally convinced Matt. I'm like, don't worry, this movie is not like scary in a typical like jumps, like the type of scary that Matt doesn't like. I mean, it's definitely
Right.
creepy, but it's not like a traditional horror movie. And that's actually kind of a source of controversy in the horror community. Some people don't think this is a horror movie at all. I absolutely think it is. But
Yeah.
so I convinced Matt to watch it, and he also had a very similar reaction to you, like a very unsettled reaction. I think overall, it's safe to say that Matt likes the movie. But when Joe and I were rewatching it for the podcast, Matt was kind of watching it with us at first, and he got up. He's like, "I can't watch this again," so he got up like
Right.
halfway through and left, which is fair because it is, like you said, very unsettling.
I empathize with Matt because I literally waited until the day of recording this podcast to do my second watch and to have that second watch by doing the director's cut, and I sat on it for the same reasons. I didn't know if I wanted to put myself through that again, and I'm I can't speak for Matt, but for me, I don't regret that decision.
Mhm.
Surprisingly, I surprisingly enjoyed this movie the second time around watching the director's cut. And speaking of which, so I was Googling just now to confirm that this movie was released by A24, which it was. And I just want to say A24 is just everywhere these
Mhm.
days, and with some amazing movies. And I feel like at this point, they could release a mediocre movie that would still be better than what any of the other studios um, can release. So kudos
Yeah,
to A24. And I also pulled up the A24 um, online website store, and I'm looking at the Midsummer Director's Cut Collector's Edition that you pointed out. It's $45. But for $45, they pack a lot of good shit into this.
that's what I'm
Um,
saying. Like, it's definitely
yeah.
worth it. It's just it's a lot of money.
Right. Exactly. I mean, the technical aspects are really good. So if you have a good Blu-ray player and a good TV, this is going to be a really great theatrical experience. I also see that there's a little book that's included, and it has
Mhm.
a foreword by Martin Scorsese. So, this is definitely a nice treat to oneself. But the streaming edition of the director's cut, which is exclusive to Apple, was 19.99, which I think is a fair price, especially the way movie ticket prices have been going up these days. Um,
Hmm.
uh, the director's cut on Apple comes with is it two or three little featurettes? I think it might be three. I could be wrong, but I think that's fair because the featurettes that are bundled with the Apple version are really good. They're not I don't think they're junket pieces. Sometimes these special features tend to be. It's not the pretty book that comes with the $45 Blu-ray version, but if you don't want to invest in that and you still want to see the director's cut, totally worth it to pay 19.99 through Apple.
Yeah. And I like that you brought up this was put out by A24, which has kind of really made a name for itself in doing more art
Hmm.
housey films. I mean, that's not all they do, but especially once the Witch, or some people jokingly call it
Right.
the Vivitch.
The
But
Vivitch.
yeah, but when that came out in 2015, they kind of really made like this breakthrough in horror film. So now they're kind of,
Hmm.
they do a little bit of everything, like I said, but there's quite a bit of horror films that they've been putting out
I,
uh,
I,
that
I,
are
I,
excellent kind of artsy art house horror films. They've also done Moonlight, which is
mm,
a queer coming of
right.
age film. So a lot of good stuff.
Thank you for putting out Moonlight because I was gonna point out that I can't believe the same studio that released The Witch and Midsummer not only came out with Moonlight but also The Farewell.
Mm.
So it's I don't know, they have a really diverse portfolio.
Yeah, and like you said, like almost not everything they put out is great, but I mean a lot of stuff that they put out is pretty solid.
One
And
could
some of it,
say, one could say, Pace, that it's better than the average bear. No, wait,
yes, the
too
average
much,
bear
too,
set on fire
too
stuff
much.
with the subpar boyfriend. Okay, I guess
I'm
we
sorry,
should.
audience. I'm sorry, Pace.
You're all good. I love it. I'm here for this. Um, so yeah, I guess we'll start our walkthrough. I kind of wrote stuff up, but I know you did too. So feel free to interject whenever
Oh, yeah, sure.
you have. But so this movie, first of all, was very difficult to write this walkthrough because it's a
Yeah,
fairly long film, but it not much happens. But so that's part of it. But so basically, the film follows university student Danny, who's played by the amazing Florence Pugh. Uh,
amazing.
it opens with her in a panic over being unable to reach her sister after her sister sent a strangely worded email. Danny reaches out to her boyfriend, Christian, who is hanging out with his friends. They all basically are telling him to dump her, and he basically says to
Hmm.
her that she's overreacting, the usual cis white straight horseshit.
I was just gonna say that this is the usual. Those exact words, exactly. Those exact
Right.
words.
He's such a dick. And
Yeah.
anyway, it turns out that her sister did in fact kill herself and her parents.
Mm.
Danny is broken with grief, and so Christian does a half-assed job at trying to comfort her. Then we fast forward a little bit in time, and we find out that Christian and his friend group, the same people basically told him to dump her, Josh and Mark, are planning to
Mhm.
join their friend Pella in Halsinglad at his family's commune. The Harga is the name of the community there,
Mhm.
because they're planning a midsummer celebration that happens once every 90 years.
Mhm.
uh, Christian hadn't told Danny about it. And so she finds out, it causes a fight. He ends up inviting her. And so she basically agrees to go on the trip with them.
Mhm.
They all make it to Sweden, where they meet two other outsiders, Connie and Simon. Uh, they all kind of trip on some mushrooms for a little bit. And Danny sees grass growing through her hand, which is kind of fun. The
Which and very symbolic.
Yeah, right. And then the day after is Danny's birthday. So Pella gives her a drawing. Christian forgets until Pella reminds him, and then he half-assed wishes her a happy birthday with some cake or whatever. We clearly do not stand Christian in this house or on this podcast. He is a jerk.
Yeah, he is a jerk played by the unfortunately sexy looking Jack Rayner. But let's continue.
Yes, he's a very attractive man.
He
And we
is.
do get some full frontal nudity in here too, which is nice. But
And
anyway.
but he plays the character with such despicableness that the full frontal was like, okay, go die already. At
Yeah,
this
right.
point, and we continue pace.
So, Pella explains, uh, while they're there, basically, Pella explains the life cycle of the Harga. They spend the first 18 years in spring, basically growing up as kids. Then they have another 18 years of summer until they are 36, which essentially they get to go out into the world and have what some communities call like a Rumspringa. And then from 36 to 54 is where they work and labor. Then 54
Right.
to 72 is winter as they enter their old age. And then what happens when someone reaches 72? Well, we find out the next day in a ritual called the Adistupa, which is based on a real life ritual in
Hmm.
some Scandinavian countries, where two of the elders try to kill themselves by leaping from a cliff onto a rock below. One of them doesn't die and gets his head bashed in by a giant mallet. Then the group
As
of
you do.
right? Then the group of outsiders is really disturbed by this, and they are convinced to stay, except for Connie and Simon, who want to leave the next day. I guess this inspired Christian to want to write his thesis on the Harga, even though Josh had already said he was going to. So they have this fight over it. They basically compromise, and they're both going to write their theses on the Harga. Mark pisses on their ancestral tree, and then he mysteriously disappears.
Mm.
Connie and Simon mysteriously disappear with excuse that one went to the bus stop and the other followed. Josh sneaks into the sacred space, basically their temple, and takes pictures of their sacred book when he is knocked unconscious by somebody wearing Mark's face, like Leatherface style.
Oh my goodness.
Then the next day, only Danny, Christian, and Pelly remain from the original group. Only Danny seems
Mm.
to be worried about it. Christian is still being an ass because Christian's doing as Christian does. Danny and Christian are both coerced into taking drugs, and Danny participates in a maypole competition, which he eventually wins and becomes the May Queen. Christian is pulled into a sex ritual to impregnate a cult member in front of most of the women of the cult. Danny discovers that, has a panic attack, and many of the cult members participate in her panic and help comfort her in a communal way. Christian tries to run away, but is given a drug that paralyzes him. He's stuffed into a bear suit, a disemboweled, like literal bear suit. One of the elders tells us gathered that there needs to be 9 sacrifices to ward off evil. 4 victims are the outsiders already killed: Simon, Connie, Mark, and Josh. And 4 are willing participants from the cult. Danny, as May Queen, gets to choose the 9th victim. She chooses Christian,
Dun
her
dun
dumbass
dun.
boyfriend, right? He's wheeled into the temple.
You.
Yep. He's wheeled into the temple and because he's still paralyzed, along with the willing participants, and is set on fire, and he burns to death. Danny sobs in horror and then slowly, gradually begins to smile. The credits roll.
The credits roll, and there's so much meaning in that smile, I gotta tell you.
Right? It's definitely like the 21st century version of the Mona Lisa smile.
You think that's what Mona Lisa was smiling about in that painting, that her boyfriend who jilted her was going down in flames in a bear suit?
I mean, why not? It's as likely an explanation as any.
Great rundown as usual, Pace. And I want to add some things too that I noticed. Let's
Yeah,
go
please do.
back. Let's go back to the beginning of the movie really quickly. I was looking up what kinds of awards this movie might have attracted, and obviously there was one nomination for best horror movie, and it did get recognized for cinematography. Quite obviously, it's a very visually appealing movie, but I wanted to know if it had gotten recognized for sound design, and I wasn't seeing that. And so, one thing I forgot to mention is that on the second viewing, so watching the director's cut, I watched it wearing headphones because I really wanted to absorb the dialogue. But it turns out that the ambient noises that happen in the scenes that happen in the world of Midsummer itself are really good. Like, they're so vivid. It's just, and I was listening with a really average Bluetooth headset. This wasn't studio grade or anything, but I was able to pick up so many interesting audio cues that just add to the texture of the story. For example, I didn't notice the first time around that in the scenes of Danny's sister's house and her parents, who all die as part of her sister's suicide, you can actually hear the hissing of the CO2 that's coming from the car, or not the CO2, but
Mm,
exhaust. So I was
yeah.
so caught off guard by that detail. Like, I literally just froze on my sofa and I was like, "Oh shit, you can hear this the hissing."
That scene, by the way, is so off-putting, and to begin the film with that, like, oh my god, it's so dark.
It's such a jolt. And the thing is, though, it is off-putting. And watching it the first time, I I was watching it as a regular human being, so I was totally put off. I was scared. You know, all the things that the director Ari, by the way, Ari, I still want you to call me. All the things that the director might have might have
I'm
intended, right?
dying. Yeah.
But watching it the second time, you know, I'm still a little disturbed because it's just filmed so effectively. But I'm appreciating the nuances more. Like, I was looking at the way the bodies are posed, and they're they're definitely mirrors to what's going to happen later. I was going to say foreshadowing, but this is the interesting thing. In one of the special features that came with a director's cut on Apple, Will Poulter said that this is not a movie. No, I don't think it was Will Poulter. I think it was one of the other cast members, actually. Said that this is not a movie about foreshadowing. It's a movie that lives in the moment. And I guess I could see that. Um, what do you think, Pace?
I don't know, like, there's been you can find all this, in, like, all sorts of listicles from, like, BuzzFeed to Cracked or any other one of those sites that has stuff like that, like, trivia
Yeah.
about these things. But, like, there's been so much written about how this movie really does a lot of parallelism, which is also a biblical
Mm,
thing.
it
So
is, yeah.
but you'll get like kind of the setup of the bodies in the beginning like you're talking about, and then you kind of
Mm,
see repeats of that, or
hmm.
people have noticed that the sister wearing the mask kind of like taped to her face is kind of appears in the trees later on in the movie, and then also some of the artwork that is like so visually stunning, like, but they show this like huge tapestry in the beginning of the film,
Right.
and so basically all the scenes of the movie are on display in that tapestry, so you already, right in the first few beats of the film, you already know what's going to happen if you pause
Absolutely.
it and kind of look through that. So I'm not going to get into that too much, but just to agree with you, Joe, that there's a lot of that there that's
Yeah.
happening in this.
Well, I was also especially stricken by the scene where Chris and his friends are all hanging out at that bar or some kind of restaurant, whatever, some dive joint for grad students, apparently. Probably a little bit like, you know, that bar that used to exist down the street from our seminary. That's long gone, and I can't remember what the name of it was. Uh, so Chris takes a phone call from Danny, and then his friends get on his case for that. And so Chris steps away from his friends. And when he takes Danny's phone call, he's doing it in front of a wall that that is pretty insignificant at first glance because it looks like a typical bar where they've tried to add character by adding like vintage pictures. And
Hmm.
then on second viewing, I realize it's kind of iconographical and parallels the imagery that we're going to see later on. And so I think the parallel that's happening here is uh, what we see in the movie as these strange pagan and ancient customs. I think they intriguingly like tend to leak into modern life. Like, modern life will never be able to erase the old ways. The old ways always have a way of appearing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I want to make a really silly joke which I feel like would undermine your amazing deep point you just made.
Completely. Do
But
it. Do it.
I'm going to say, because that's a very compelling point, and I'm glad you brought that up. But were those pictures of Abraham Lincoln covering the entire fucking wall?
Well, you know, we are long removed from the Halloween universe at this point. Oh, but your joke, amusing as it was, it does remind me of a cool fact that both you and I know, and I think you told me. But Midsummer was initially pitched to Ari as just a conventional slasher movie, right?
Yeah.
And so all those elements are there. You know, young students going on an international trip. Ooh, one by one they all disappear. Ooh, at the hands of these friendly but ultimately sinister people. Ooh, but this is the thing though, even though those tropes are there, it's so different coming from Ari Aster's vision, coming from A24. It's definitely I wanna use your word pace and say that it's art house, but I don't want to make this movie sound like it's inaccessible and that it's snobby, It's just a really well done scary movie.
Mhm. Yep. Uh, he, I think what really grounds this film, because like visually and kind of also the soundscape you talk about, there's a lot of like art house elements, and I'm not even going to try to say the cinematographer Paolo Pogor. Yeah, apologies to you for
Good
trying
try.
to, but just gorgeous cinematography and stuff. So that kind of is a lot of those, and a lot of this like parallelism stuff. It's a lot of like brainy, stunning visual stuff that you associate with art house. But then at display in the center of this film is this like heart torn open of Danny essentially, and just seeing the true like we've we all know friends, or maybe we ourselves who have been in those kind of relationships that are just
Right.
falling apart, and yet somebody like there's kind of this codependent element to it where you can't just quite
Yes.
end it even though it should. And it's so we're seeing such this literal, real, grounded approach to this awful toxic relationship at this heart of this film that makes the rest of the film just not feel like inaccessible like one might think of for an art house film. Like I think of another A24 film, The Lighthouse, which I
I
think
haven't
is
seen that
very
yet.
I liked it, but I think it's one of those, it's very art house and it's kind of inaccessible. So it's like
Right.
compare if you compare these two, I definitely think Midsummer is definitely more accessible to the typical audience. But this also kind of brings up the point I was bringing up earlier, which is for the typical horror audience though, I can see why this movie kind of casts a lot of ripples in the horror community of saying this isn't
Mm.
horror, because it does something very different than the typical horror film.
But then, I mean, if we're gonna go along with that argument, uh, I would still want to classify it as horror, but it would have to be some kind of subgenre. Like how there's body horror. So like
Hmm.
what kind of horror, what kind of subgenre would this be?
Well,
Is it psychological horror or I don't know.
Wikipedia classifies it as folk horror.
I like that. That's
FOLK.
interesting.
Hmm. Which I like as well. It definitely seems, I don't know. It has those all the slasher elements, like you say. So it definitely is. I don't know. It's hard for me to think of it as anything other than horror. Because how else would you define it? Like it's just
Right.
very, and kind of the mood of the film. One of the things that just struck me upon the first watching this film is just how the first part of the film is very dark,
Mhm.
visually dark. Like it is all shot in dark blues and
Yeah.
grays and stuff like that. Then it kind of transitions into kind of like medium tones. But then when they get to Sweden, it's kind of like Dorothy landing in Oz. It's suddenly this bright colors for the rest of
It's
the whole fucking movie in
it's
like
an
the bright
yeah.
of day.
It's like an
And it
assault by the sun.
Yeah, and it's like it makes daylight fucking terrifying and
Yes, it
creepy and
does.
uneasy and unsettling in a way that literally no film I've ever seen has been able to do in this way. Like it's just the entire film, it's daylight. You think that they're safe, and yet you just feel so
You
uneasy the entire film.
I think you nailed it there, Pace. I think this is the key uh metaphor or whatever we want to call it. The key lesson here is that um everything that is unsettling, everything that is bad for us, it's not that just we can see it. We know it. We just find reasons not to engage with it.
Mm,
Everything is
mhm.
everything to borrow from scripture, uh, and make it into my own. Everything is visible under the sun. We just make up reasons to go around it, and then when the thing that we see is the thing that we crash into inevitably and eventually, we make up reasons for that too. Wouldn't you agree? Like,
Yeah.
it's all there. We just, I mean, speaking from personal experience, and especially in the way I've handled breakups, I when I see my part in what led to those breakups, I look back and see not just the red flags and not just as a result of hindsight, but here's the thing too, and I'm being extremely vulnerable here, especially with my last relationship. I knew what was I knew what I was doing. I knew I knew what the consequences were likely to be, but I leaned hard on the likely, and I kept thinking to myself, maybe I can change him, or this and that, and I threw away a year of my life, and that didn't happen. And by the way, part of the motivation for watching it the second time, uh well, the list of reasons, Pace, included: number one, I was curious genuinely about the director's cut. Number two, I love doing work for this podcast. I don't care that we don't get paid. I would like to get paid. And Ari Aster, if you want to marry me and I can inherit some of that money, I'm just going to spend the rest of the podcast like flirting with Ari Aster. Can I do? No, just kidding.
Yeah, because
Um,
he definitely listens to our podcast, so he knows.
you must. We are experts and perhaps divas in our field. But anyway, yeah, I love doing the work for this podcast. And number three, I started thinking about that last relationship and how it's been about a year, maybe almost 2 years since that 1 year relationship ended. And the partner that this human being dumped me for, I'm wondering if they have finally made it and if they got married. And I don't know one way or another because I blocked all of them
Yeah.
on social media. But just the thought of that alone was enough to stir up enough emotions that I plunged right into watching this movie again.
Well, it's strange you say that because, like, when I watched it for the first time, I was kind of going through some weird relationship stuff too.
Mm,
Matt and I are polyamorous, so we were dating somebody, and I kind of felt like some of the stuff going. I felt kind of like I think, like I said earlier, so many of us can relate to Danny or have friends who are like Danny. Like I knew
hmm.
that there were things that weren't working, and yet I cared about the person so much that I wanted to hold on to
Right.
and so very similar to you uh but what's different between the person that Matt and I were with and the person Danny was with,
Hmm.
Christian, is the person I was with actually was willing to do some of the hard work and push through. And so
Mm-hmm.
we had a little bit of a falling out, but then things changed, and so now this person's one of our closest friends. But it's just like
Oh.
it's one of those situations where it's just like it it can go any number of ways, but like what's really interesting is just kind of kind of the tendency I think in many of us. I mean, so this is going to turn into therapy, horror nerds at therapy podcast, that probably
Don't
this
don't don't think
episode.
twice about it, Pace, because as we all know, everyone does these podcasts to work out our issues in front of the public. Am I right?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
right.
for
Call
sure.
me out. Call me out. No. Yeah, go ahead,
But like,
Pace.
yeah, I'm in a 12-step group for adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional
Mm,
families.
hmm.
And so one of the things that we talk about in this, one of the characteristics, one of the things we read every meeting is the characteristics of an adult child uh, of alcoholics and dysfunctional families, is this kind of inability to let go of a relationship, any kind of relationship, not just romantic, but any sort of friendship or relationship we have in our life, because of that this fear that it's kind of attachment issues, but this fear that there will be nothing to replace this relationship, that we're
Oh,
going to basically be left alone and be
right.
abandoned. And so it's like going to these extreme lengths to hold on to something which shouldn't be being held on to. And so it's just kind of one of the things that we learn, and one of the promises that we read every time in the 12 step meet in this particular 12 step meeting is kind of this promise of and with many 12 step programs there's a little bit of theological and religious message in there. So kind of one of the things it talks about is like this promise of abundance, that we don't need to be so fearful that we're going to lose all these relationships that are
Hmm.
not healthy for us, because there's some sort of higher power, using that language, to that will kind of replenish us and has this deep love for us, and whether it's the universe or God or whomever, that there's kind of this higher power that is leading us towards abundance in our relationships, so we don't need to be fearful. And that's one of the hardest things I think
Theological
for,
hot takes.
I know, right? But I think that's one of the hardest things for any of us as humans is to, especially those of us who are survivors of trauma or grew up in dysfunctional households or any number of things. Like Danny clearly, has this really unhealthy relationship with her family. We don't get a lot of it because her family dies in the beginning, but like, we can tell just from that email, like Danny is trying to call for her family and so you can see why she would have these attachment issues and why she would be in this weird codependent relationship with Christian, especially after her family's death, out of those kind of fears and dysfunction and worry of abandonment and all those things.
Yeah. You you've said so much, and I was taking notes literally. So you mentioned that the person that you were involved with, there was some trouble in doing the work it took to get through the relationship, and I couldn't help but think of the spat that Josh and Chris got into at the bar when Josh said outright to him, you don't want to do the work, you just want to play out this drama. And then
Mm.
Chris snaps at Josh, okay, thank you for psychoanalyzing me. And that relationship between Josh and Chris is interesting for me, because it wasn't until the second viewing of the movie that I realized they don't seem to have liked each other from the beginning, yet they hang out with each other. And so I want to clarify, in case you didn't know I'm gay. I'm saying that so sarcastically because, like, just like, I radiate gay. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's
I'm not
Pride
supposed to
Month.
laugh
We're
loudly.
recording this in Pride Month. It's being released in Pride Month. We are very queer friendly. We are both queer. We're so
Amen. Amen,
audience,
my
if
friend.
you haven't figured it out by episode 16 that we're on, then I'm sorry for you.
I I mean, the clues were there in broad daylight, no pun intended. Uh the point that I wanted to make was that I've lost my oh, yes. Uh as a gay person who hangs around in not just the gay community but the queer community in general, uh, I really don't understand cishet masculine dynamics all that much. And so my question is this is this like tension between Josh and Chris just a normalized aspect of what they think friendship is? I'm just like wondering, like, if you two don't like each other so much, why do you all go out for pizza? Why do you all hang out in each other's apartments? Why are you all taking an international trip?
I know, right? And it definitely feels like we get with Christian, kind of like you were saying, like he clearly does not have
Yeah.
he seems to just be kind of like bumbling through life in the way that many a lot of the criticisms of kind of white culture is this like white man mediocrity, that you can get
Mm-hmm.
these very mediocre people in high paying
Yes.
positions that just somehow stumble through life and just opportunities keep landing on them, and it's like, how? Whereas everybody who's marginalized, and whether that's women, queer people, people of color, like the amount of work we have to put in to continually prove our worth. And then you have people like Christian who are just able to like basically sleepwalk through grad school. And that's
Right.
interesting to me because Josh is a black man and Christian is a white man. So I mean, there's
Right.
definitely that tension there too, where
Absolutely.
Josh is going above and beyond to do his thesis on this community, and Christian is instantly like, oh, I'm gonna just kind of like copy your work and copy your ideas. And
Yes. Yes, yeah. So, and yeah, you touched on that the mediocrity syndrome of the cishet white man. And then there's also the element of maybe this is just what they think friendship is like. I don't know. So, dear listeners who are cishet, not
we're
only do we
sorry.
no, I mean, well, yes, but we also love you.
We
Remember,
do.
love the sin, hate the sin.
Yes.
How do you like a taste of your own medicine now? No, no, I'm kidding. But chime in. Let us know. I mean, is this the way? Is this how do I say this masculinely? Is this the way dudes be acting, bro? So
Right.
awful. I can't.
I
That's ridiculous.
I
Uh,
just, yeah, I have a lot of questions for you. If
I,
you are a
I
cishet man, please write in. I have a lot of questions.
please do because it's not what I expected from this movie, yet it's what's happened. I've walked away from this movie literally thinking, are men like that? Because I have met guys like Chris, believe me. And
Mm.
I'm just like, why are you like that? Why are you constantly gaslighting and not even being subtle about your gaslighting sometimes?
Oh my
But
god, yeah. Ugh.
we could um we could spend a whole podcast episode on that, but I did want to move on to the second point that I got from your analysis is you mentioned the codependency. That was a big theme here, and it reminds me of a scene during one of the mealtime moments at the cult, where there's a baby sitting next to Danny, and the woman holding the baby explains to Danny that the baby's mother is away on a pilgrimage. And that was set up intentionally so that the baby can learn detachment. And while the mother is away, the whole community is responsible for caring for the baby. And I thought that was such an interesting contrast from the modern world that we were leaving behind in America.
It's like Hillary Clinton's book, It Takes a Village.
It does. It does. She should have been the president in 2016, but that's another podcast.
Yep.
But it really does speak to the tension between individualism and community, and those are big topics in theology, especially in Christian tradition. Those are are big ticket items. But I want to clarify that Midsummer doesn't give us any answers to that. It may demonstrate those extremes, but it does so in a way that's really meant to entertain. And I'm not minimizing the quality of the movie. I just don't think it's adding any serious layers of discussion to that tension. But the movie is a good example, nonetheless, of the extreme of individuality, which is
Yeah.
the beginning dark part of the movie, and then extreme community, where everyone is in agreement that it is okay for a 72-year-old man and woman to end their lives by jumping off a cliff.
Yeah, and how it's kind of then explained in the film as something that it's a delight that they look forward to because they see life
Hmm.
as kind of a circle and connected. And so I agree with you that there's a lot of this tension that's being presented between the individualism and the communalism of this without any sort of conclusions, just kind of letting the tension itself drive kind of the narrative along and also build some of that unease that I think the film has. But what's really interesting, kind of like this, is just, Josh and Christian arguing over who gets to write a thesis. And then the community's answer is you both get to, but you have to share kind of your research and stuff like that. And just kind of like, why is academia in the in the Western Hemisphere so much this, especially in North America
So
and especially in the United
competitive.
States,
Yeah.
just this competitive, cutthroat, publish or perish kind of thing. And I'm not saying European models, especially like I'm in a PhD program, of course. So there's a lot of difference between European models for academia, and especially like higher education when it comes to like doing PhD work and American academia, which just I feel like it American like just it's just so deeply ingrained into this
Yeah.
Americanism of like this individualism that it just and it's
Yeah.
like it just doesn't fucking work.
It doesn't. Yeah. It
There's
just,
limited resources. We're all fighting for it. Why don't we just share?
why
Come
don't we
on.
just share it? And being more collaborative will produce so much more knowledge than we can think of, rather than forcing everyone to be individually competitive.
Mhm.
It's literally that cliche of let's put all of our heads together. It's a cliche, but it's true. That's
Yeah.
what works. Let's all put our heads together. And it's interesting to see that that contrast is really visible between Pele and Chris and Josh. And Chris and Josh are so um deep into this competition of who gets to, write the first thesis about this community, this cult. And Pele is all like, both of you can write, as you pointed it out, but it's interesting because he doesn't fully get why there's a competition to write about it. Like he's
Mhm.
it's like he's just catering, to their weird customs, which is
Mhm.
ironic, right? Because that's what Josh and
Yeah.
Chris are doing at the cult. Um, but mostly the sense that you're getting from Pele is, okay, I gave Chris permission. Okay, I gave Josh permission. What's the problem? Of course,
Right.
I would totally forgive the viewer for not noticing that nuance. You and I, as grad students, have a unique insight into that. I think a more universal interpretation of Pele's relationship with Chris and Josh is that competition between Chris and Josh is moot. It's irrelevant. Pele knows that they're going to be absorbed into that cult, and they're not
Yeah.
going to make it back to the outside world. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, there seems to be one of the things that the director's cut um seems to suggest,
Mhm,
and this is only from me reading it and from me hearing you talk about it, is that there are several there are 9 sacrifices that need to be made to
mhm.
appease whatever the gods or to ward off evil. That part is not fully explained, but we know that there's supposed to be 9 sacrifices, and it seems like there are opportunities for the visitors to the community, the outsiders, to be absorbed into the community in a way that would not lead to their deaths. Like it does seem to me like there is kind of a choice there. And one of the things is like the in the scene that we kind of talked about, you and I talked about before we started recording the podcast, is the scene about the drowning where it seems like one of the characters might who is of the village might drown as
Yeah,
part of one of their rituals, and had she drowned, then she
it's
would have been
a he. It's a male
oh, sorry.
child. Yeah, it's fine.
Had he drowned, then he probably would have been one of the village's sacrifices. But since he didn't and he survived that particular challenge, then we find out later that Connie was drowned in his place. So it seems to me like there are ways to kind of, I mean, for like Danny, for one, she survives to the very end, and she in fact becomes a May Queen, and she's an outsider. So one of the interesting things that this film seems to suggest, although it doesn't say, is that Josh and Christian do not necessarily have to die. They just are unwilling to leave behind this kind of individual competitiveness. And
Yes.
that's kind of what leads to their death. Not just the sheer fact of them being outsiders, but being unable to be absorbed into the community and into kind of a communal way of living.
Yes, I am. I'm doing that poetry snapping applause thing because you are 1000% on point. And it's also leading me on a train of thought as to into Danny's internal world. Uh so the codependency thing is definitely its own feature of her character. I mean, she's clearly she clearly leans on Chris in a time of crisis when Chris is not the best resource, right?
Mm,
And in fact, in one scene at the beginning of the movie, before they've gone to Sweden, she's on the phone with her friend who is not we don't see, but did a really good job. The actress did a really good job in that conversation. She's on the phone with her friend talking about, am I doing this? Am I doing that? Am I pushing him away? All the questions are about her and what she is doing about this relationship. And it's like, girl, you need to be analyzing what that man is doing to you. But she doesn't seem to be capable of that because of the codependency.
mhm.
Her friend is bringing up those important points. And at one point her friend even says, "Well, if Chris is X, then you got to leave." Like, she says it flat out. Um, so again, the codependency thing is definitely its own feature of Danny's character and her journey in the movie, but also in the context of her multiple losses. Her sister committing suicide and taking her parents with her. Um, Danny's life is gone, and Chris is the one thing that she's holding on to, um, because you said it a few moments ago, Pace. She's afraid of what comes next, which is she doesn't know what comes next. So the natural instinct will be to hold on to Chris, even though he's terrible. And like I said, his terribleness is as obvious as broad daylight, to make use of the
Mhm.
metaphor here. And so by the end of the movie, by the end of the movie, we're not just getting um, a reward of a comeuppance for for Danny, as we see Chris being burned in the hut, being forced to wear a bear suit. I think this is really Danny finally realizing that entire part of her life is over.
Mhm.
Now the question remains: um, is she simply just uh, starting a new life with the same shit, different daylight? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I mean, those people have their issues too.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the film definitely problematizes, like you said, it doesn't point to any conclusions. It just kind of holds attention that there are multiple ways of doing life. But individualism in this film kind of leads to death or destruction.
Right,
Communalism doesn't necessarily lead to that, but there is own issues, as we can see. And so that's very interesting. And I mean, of course, you could read all sorts of metaphors into that. Like climate change is one that you could easily read into that. Like being
right,
so hyper individualistic is what is destroying the planet. And so we can come together globally to create solutions and to change the world and all that stuff and to save us. But if we don't, we're going to end up burning to death in a in that yellow temple too, just from the planet. So I mean, there's all sorts
yeah,
of metaphors that can be read into that are compelling, but like us, core, like you said, that one one is kind of presented as perhaps the better alternative, but that does not mean that it's not without its own issues. And the question, of course, like you said at the end of the film, now what for Danny? She just basically killed her boyfriend in this
yeah.
very cathartic ending. It kind of implies that maybe she found community here, but it doesn't say that for
Hmm.
sure. So is she going to go back to the States? Is she going to join the cult? Who knows? It leaves it open. And if she does, like, I'm not sure it's going to be a happy ending for her either.
Right, right. And the movie doesn't give us a lot of insight into who Danny really is. I mean, evidently she was close to her family, had a good relationship with them. Um, we can imply that she was doing fairly well in school. She had her own apartment, um, but it's hard to say if Danny would be willing to do the work that it takes to be in a community, because living in community means you've got to give up some stuff in order to, be with the others, because you're going to be sharing, your life with them, and there are things that you have to give up from an individual life. And
Yeah, like
so
giving up having intimacy one on one with another person and instead having some sort of group orgy
did,
where
did
the
you
old lady comes
did you-
behind you and
I no
pushes pushes
no
his ass to help impregnate.
not even the old lady pushing his ass. Do you remember when Chris is kissing Maya, and then, like, he gets up just to take a breath or whatever, and then that woman is just singing like
Yep.
in his face. And I couldn't tell if what Chris's facial expression was saying, "Oh my god, is there a woman singing in my face while I'm having sex?" Or if it was a result of how they drugged him, or maybe both. But I was just cracking up, like, just imagining what it must be like to have sex, to be in that position, literally, and then look up and see this random naked woman singing at you, singing cheerfully, I might.
Yeah, I mean, like, the cult is definitely not presented as the good guys here either. So please
Right.
don't mistake that. What I think there are some
Mm-mm.
commentaries that Ari Aster is making, um, about like the uh individualism versus communalism that are kind of that you can get takeaways from, but that does not necessarily mean that the cult is the good guys here because
Of course,
they
yeah.
literally murdered 9 people, well, 11 if you count the 2, people who killed themselves by jumping off the cliff. So, I mean, this is a kinda gory movie, and it's all the cult, kind of doing it, killing people, bringing in 4 outsiders with the intention of killing them, it seems. So, like, it's just they're not the good guys either.
Right.
And, like it seems like there's no room for like everyone dresses the same, everyone kind of speaks the same, and so there's like no room to break from some sort of like whatever this cis hetero patriarchy sort of thing is,
Yeah.
because like there's no queerness here. Everybody is straight and acts in a very like
Right.
standard straight way. So
Yes.
this is not good either. I'm not saying this is good.
Right.
This is the cult is very bad.
Right. Well, and I was also wondering that same thing about the cult. I asked myself, I don't think there are any same sex couples in this cult, and if there are, either they have to be very secretive about it, or they've been shoved off a cliff. I don't know, because
Mhm,
queerness, homosexuality, and all those queer identities,
mhm.
like, it seems like that is not standard in their community, which,
Yeah,
which makes me sad, because, if you're born
well,
gay, or if you're born knowing that you don't agree with the gender that you're assigned, there seems to be little recourse for that in that cult.
yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like any sort of sexual intercourse, the way the film kind of, and not just to like bring queer identity to sex, because that's its own issue, and I'm not saying that at all.
Hmm.
But I mean, there it seems like any sort of sexual intimacy happens at the bidding of the cult,
Yeah.
because when they have sex, it is for the purpose of
Yes.
procreation, to have sex with an outsider to create a child, and then the community raises the child, so it's not even that person, the parent, anymore raising them. And then when we talk about the one, I don't know what the term is, like the muse or the guru of the group or something, whoever writes the book is the result of
Oh,
intentional
the
inbreeding. So it
Oracle.
seems like, yeah, the oracle, that's the word I was trying to think of. Is that also like that was also very much a
Right.
planned, they said intentional inbreeding for a specific purpose. So
See.
seems like the only sex that happens in this cult is at the cult's bidding in very particular times and
Right.
places. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, and I'm glad that you brought up
yeah.
the oracle, because I was thinking about that too when the priest, was it Father Ulf? They all look like Father Ulf to me. But anyway, what do I know? I'm a brown Filipino queer. Um uh I'll just say Father Ulf, when he was explaining the oracle's existence, who I believe the oracle's name is Reuben. He was explaining Reuben's existence, like you said, as the product of intentional incestual breeding, because the oracle has a spiritual, knowledge that is very unique, and that is, to say it in a clinical way, that serves a function for their community, and it suits their worldview. It suits their spirituality, right? But I'm also
Hmm.
wondering, like, by bringing, two cousins together to give life to, what you are expecting is going to be your oracle, like, there's a spiritual tension there. There's an existential, you're giving life intentionally to someone who will, you want to be intentionally deformed because you believe that they have a sixth sense that will support
Yeah,
your belief system. And like,
it is a
yeah,
very, very disgusting look at the role of disability in the society, or the role of any sort of
yes,
um, difference in appearance or anything like that, a difference in cognitive abilities,
yes,
is all it, to kind of put it on a pedestal as a religious thing. You might think, that's good because they kind of are supporting this, but it's like in one very particular purpose and function. No agency is given to this person for their own life. They are
yes, amen,
created with the entire purpose of fulfilling this role in this
right,
community, and not seen as an individual person with their own wants, needs, and desires, which is just very problematic. And then, of course, we see that the rest of the community is all able
right.
bodied. So, does that mean that when a child is born who is not able bodied or something, is that child killed or something? Like, are they trying to curate a very specific type of person in this cult, and
Yeah,
if you don't meet those specifications, what happens to you? It doesn't say, and that's very problematic as well.
absolutely. And the only time that we see someone who is not able-bodied is when a wheelchair is brought out for the incapacitated Chris, who they will ultimately sacrifice. And that itself is speaking a very loud commentary about what this community thinks about that issue. I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking about I can't remember specific episodes, but I'm thinking about Star Trek in general and how nuanced Star Trek can be. I wish I could remember the episode I'm thinking about, because there's an episode where the crew of the Enterprise meets some planet of like humanoids or humans. I can't remember. And when they come to meet the members of the crew who beam down into their little town, they're very diverse. And what I mean is that there are of varying ages and varying abilities. Like, one of the people who comes to meet the captain is some guy who's walking with a cane. And so this community of people is very different from what we get in Midsummer. Everyone, it's very much homogenous, and
Hmm.
difference is treated as something to be ritualized, as something to return to the earth, rather than giving that person agency or a chance to flourish. That, oh, Pace, that is what I think is lacking from that spiritual belief system. As a Catholic, uh they may look like they're living an idyllic life, but I don't think there's any actual flourishing happening with those people.
Hmm. And like, yeah, it just raises all sorts of questions too. For instance, like they have this entire temple full of these sacred writings written by the oracle, but it's like you don't really see them read, or so it's like they believe that there's some sort of living scripture that is ongoing,
Hmm.
and yet how is that shaping the community? How is that building the community, especially if they have these rituals that date back thousands of years that seem to go unchanged? So it just seems like it's a very stagnant community too. And so it just, so there's, like you're saying, there's just all sorts of issues within this community as well.
This is a this is reminding me of the deleted scene from the director's that was in the director's cut. Um, uh, the reason why I'm thinking about it now is of something that you said a few moments earlier, Pace. We were talking about breeding and how they keep their bloodlines clean. And I was thinking to myself, what if their process, what if it doesn't work? What if there's some insurmountable problem, such as they are not able to bring in outsiders in the way they are now, right? So the way they're able to bring in outsiders is they send people out on pilgrimage, quote unquote, to learn a trade that will be useful to their community, and also to bring in outsiders who they hope will add to the gene pool. But what is their plan B? Right? It doesn't seem like they have a plan B. Their faith is very much in this system, which is religiously valid. I mean, their faith is strong, but to their detriment, right? And what is your plan B if that doesn't work? And I was imagining a sort of plan B of desperation for them, where they have to kidnap babies in the night and smuggle them back to their communities, um, as their plan B. And that made me think in turn of the deleted scene that appears in the director's cut. It so there's in the theatrical release, there's a moment where Danny comes up to Josh to ask him for a sleeping pill, because she knows she's not going to be able to sleep that night, and we just automatically think that her asking that question is connected to watching the ritual suicide of the two elderly people. But she has actually come back from another ceremony that took place, at a lake. Um, and uh, it's the ceremony where they almost drown a child as an offering to their gods. And in the end, Danny stops them. She just cries, "No, you can't do that." And then the child goes running back to someone who is a parental figure, or I don't know, a primary caretaker or something like that. And as you said earlier, Pace, that's a setup for fulfilling the roles in the nine sacrifices. Yes, it's nice that that child, was able to be stopped from being thrown into the lake by Danny's horrified reaction. But then this means we also find out that Connie is the one that they really threw into the lake. Um, so after Danny stops that, she just kind of leaves the group, leaves the lake in a huff. Chris follows her, and they get into this argument. Um, Danny is threatening to leave. She's like, she's seen enough. This shit is bananas. Bananas. um,
Yep.
and one of the things that Danny says during that argument was, do you not question how these people are able to do this in secret? Like, if people found out about this in the real world, it would be all over for them. And so, I'm wondering, how did they keep this up? If this happens every 90 years, like, how do they evade any media, any law enforcement? It's it's just so strange. It seems like, if we're to take this as a literally spiritual movie, it seems like their faith is working out for them so far.
Mm-hmm.
Either that, or they're good at hiding the bodies.
Yep. Yep.
So it looks like we've strayed into theological talk without actually
I know.
meaning
I
to.
feel like
Yeah,
for a movie like this, it's kind of hard
it's
not
hard
to,
not
because
to.
the whole movie has so much deep
Yeah.
theology. So I guess, kind of speaking of that, is there anything else you would talk about the movie itself, or should we kind of go more intentionally into
Well,
theology?
one fun fact I want to bring up about the movie itself is that it turns out that Jack Rayner, Will Poulter, and Toni Collette have all been in a movie together, a 2014 Irish drama called Glassland. So I thought
Oh,
that it was
interesting.
interesting, yeah, that all these three actors who worked with Ari Aster have actually been in a film together before.
Very interesting. Yeah. Um, now I kind of want to see that. Oh, do you know what kind of genre it is?
Let's see. Wikipedia says that it's a drama, and it
Mm.
and it sounds like a drama. The plot summary says Jack Rayner stars as a young man who tries to help his mother, played by Toni Collette, with her alcoholism.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
a very, very, very not related to cults, a very human, everyday movie.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check that one out, I think.
What about you? Anything that you wanted to say about the movie itself, or how
No,
about that score, Pace? Woo,
it's
man!
it's a lot. Like it's oh my
But
god. It's kind
it's
of
all
like a salt on the senses, visual and oral senses throughout the
yeah.
entire movie.
I was gonna say it's beautiful in a really terrifying way. It makes me think of the classical definition of awesome, which was to describe God in a scary way. Like
Mm,
being in awe of God in its original definition meant that you were so overwhelmed by God's greatness that you would literally die, or it was believed that you would die. And so
yeah.
there's definitely for me an awesomeness to the score of this movie.
I would agree with that for sure, and I get into the cinematography. Like I was
Oh
kind of
yeah.
saying, this movie is just there's this one scene that is just so visually well. Actually, it's kind of this whole segment of the kind of the transition of the film where uh it's transitioning from the early part that's kind of like dark, visually dark, to the lightness of
Yeah.
brightness of Sweden. So but they're on like Danny kind of closes the door, and then suddenly she's closing a door in an apartment, and then it's closing a door. The door closes, and she's in an airplane, and
Oh,
then
I like that too.
right, and there's like in that whole scene, and then there's that part when they're driving en route to the village, and you just kind of had the camera's like upside down, and then kind of slowly
Yes.
like it's just that whole kind of sequence is just very visually breathtaking,
Yeah.
and well put together, and kind of I think shows the transitions in time in a way that works, but hasn't that I have not really seen transitions done that way before. So
Well,
kudos.
as a movie about grief, I think that visual imagery, that visual commentary makes sense. Especially, I found myself empathizing, of all things, with Danny being in the apartment bathroom one moment and the airplane moment the next, because
Mhm.
in the couple of milliseconds it took for that transition to happen, I was thinking that's exactly what grief feels like. Like you're jumping from one moment to another. You don't remember what happens in between because
Yeah.
it's all such a blur.
Yeah, a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. But yeah, I in other words, I agree with you. That definitely now that you say that I agree with you 100% cuz that's for me kind of like when I've been through depressive episodes, it's a lot of going from one thing to another and not really recognizing or
Right.
being fully conscious or aware of what's going on around you. And just kind of looking back at like a whole month and being like, what happened during this month? Like, I haven't
Mhm.
been productive. I haven't done anything. Like, it's just, yeah.
Well, then it doesn't it become interesting then that they end up in this, this cult, this community in northern Sweden, where it's really difficult to tell time conventionally because of how close we are to the sun. And so you
Yeah.
get the midnight sun and you don't get conventional nighttime.
Yeah.
In fact, I think that scene, that deleted scene by the lake, I feel like that was the only time I saw night while they were in Sweden.
Yeah. That's, there are a few times when like it shows them sleeping and you can see that's kind of like twilight outside. So it's like,
Exactly.
it's not dark, but you can
Yeah.
kind of, it's like everything's kind of like in a muted blue as opposed to
Yeah.
the brightness of the rest of it.
And the deleted scene by the lakeside, it took place more in conventional nighttime, and it was shot beautifully. Like even though it was nighttime, it looked absolutely pretty. Um, the other point that I was gonna make about that deleted scene is I can see why Ari Aster decided to cut it. Now, the decision to trim the excess 24 minutes was by the studio. They thought that it was already long enough, and so it's not a movie that would be marketable. Um, I can see why he decided to delete that particular scene though, because the conversation between Danny and Chris, especially where Danny brings up the fact that the authorities, if they ever get a hold of this cult, it's over. I think that brings up a level of logic that would distract from the movie. And I think what Ari Aster's strength is in revealing just enough, but not too much. You know what I mean? And so I think that scene, if you had to cut out a scene, that would have been it, because
Yeah.
the what Danny is saying, it just kind of throws off the balance of I guess the mystique of the movie.
But there's also a good point that to bring back to some an ongoing discussion as we are watching newer horror films in the genre of how do you isolate characters, because we talked about like Halloween
Yes.
2018 and stuff. And so this one, of course, they're so far north that there's no cell phone service, so like
Right.
Danny looks at her phone, there's no bars,
Right.
there's no way to leave the cult because there's only like one or two motor vehicles in the area. So it's
Yeah.
like, so like when Connie and Simon, I think was his name, tried to leave, and
Right.
someone's like, "Oh, we drove them into town," but it's like because there's only one person who has a car. It's like they can't leave even if they want to.
Right.
So that's a very so I think just the setting of this is a very remote and isolating setting, which really I think helps. And that's something too. Like we see Danny on the phone so much in the opening scenes with she's on the phone with
Yes.
Christian, she's on the phone with her friend, she's on the phone trying to reach her sister, and then it's like suddenly it's like the rest of the movie there's no technology or cellular devices or anything, although they do make a remark about some of the kids watching a movie. I can't remember what movie they're
It was
watching.
Austin Powers.
Oh, Austin Powers, yeah. So I guess they have a DVD player or something there, a VHS player, but not much technology.
And so yeah, I like that you brought up that contrast, because that's the point of this community, is that you will never need a phone because you're always going to be all up in each other's grill. Okay, like, and that's the whole point, that's the whole function, that's the whole feature of the community.
Hmm. Well, we are over an hour and a half in our recording, so
Ooh,
I think we should get to our deep. Like I said, I think we already covered a lot of the theological ground as we've been going through it because it's a very theologically dense and
yeah.
philosophical movie, and that's kind of the nature of many art house films.
Hmm.
But I want to know if there's any kind of deep thing we haven't touched on, theological thing that you want to talk about. I think I want to talk about biblical parallelism since I brought that up, but I feel like I should explain it a little bit more. But what do you have before I get into that?
I think I've made a lot of my theological pulls, and I want to hear your biblical parallelism.
Okay, well, as we kind of talked about in the film, this film has a lot of parallelism where basically what I mean by that is it will show you one thing and then it will kind of repeat it visually or thematically or within the story itself at a later point. And like one particular instance is we see the way that Danny's parents are killed and her sister is killed in the beginning from the carbon uh monoxide poisoning or whatever it was, and
Hmm.
then later on after the people jumped off the cliff and die, there's kind of a flash of we see instead of the people who died there around the rock that they landed on, we see Danny's family laid out in a very like symmetrical pose with her sister in the middle with the gas mask on and her parents on the
Yeah.
other side. And so that's that would be kind of an example of a parallelism of bringing up something from the beginning and then kind of retouching it. And we also see that in the artwork a lot too, like how the artwork, there's many scenes in this, like there's one scene when they first get um to the village or community or whatever it is, where it shows a tapestry, and basically the tapestry goes through showing how a woman creates a love potion, and it shows her like
Mm-hmm.
clipping her pubic hairs and all this, and putting
Mm-hmm.
menstrual blood, I think, too, into
Mm-hmm.
some sort of potion. And then later on, we see that actually happen. And
Right.
so a lot of films do this like for foreshadowing, but this doesn't feel like foreshadowing, like you said. It's kind of like trying to live in the moment. So instead, it's kind of creates these setups where you have these things that are either visually similar or thematically similar or within a narrative similar, or a lot of the same conversation that Danny and Christian have over and over and over again, trying to salvage this relationship, just
Right.
keep reoccurring. Um, and that happens in the Bible a lot too. I think, and it happens in the Bible in two ways. First of all, it happens in the poetry of the Bible, like the Psalms and stuff, a lot as kind of like a
Yeah.
poetic device. But I'm thinking like narratively in the Bible, there's parallelisms that are set up. Like in the Gospel of Luke, in the beginning, we have first the story of Elizabeth finding out she's pregnant with John the Baptist, and then we find out Mary is going to be
Right.
pregnant with Jesus. And
Yeah.
then we go back to Elizabeth, and John the Baptist is born. And then we go back to Mary, and Jesus is born. And so it's kind of like creating this parallelism in a way to contrast the two stories. So we see how God is acting in one way about John the Baptist, and then in his birth, and then we see how God is acting in a different way with Jesus, as a way to kind of show that Jesus is going to be the savior of humanity in a way that John the Baptist is not. And yet there's still this connection between the two of them because both are part of God's plan. And so that's one way to do it, is to kind of contrast and show differences. And then there's another way, and I'm having difficulty thinking off the top of my head of an example of this, but this happens in the Hebrew Bible a lot, actually, where there'll be two kind of bookends
Mm-hmm.
to a part of the Bible that kind of have similar narrative or literary things, to are set up in a very similar way. And the point of that is to basically show you what's in the middle of those two things. So that's the important piece, is there's a bookend on a bookend where God does one thing here, and then God does the exact same thing here, or there might be like two healing miracles that are almost exactly the same. But the point of those is that there's something that happens in the middle of that is kind of being accentuated by these two similar stories, parallel stories on the other side. So I wonder if that's kind of part of what's happening here, is like by creating a lot of these similar parallel narratives or visual elements and stuff, if it's a way of contrasting different pieces of it, is it a way of kind of accentuating some of what's happening in the middle meat of the film? I'm not quite sure, but I do know that it whatever's happening there, it is still very much visually stunning. And just a lot of thought has gone into this movie that we don't get in this level of thought in most films in the horror genre. There are
It,
a few, but like just the
mhm.
amount of thinking that went into creating these sort of parallelisms and stuff. It's a literary feature that isn't just unique to the Bible, of course, but it's something that often happens in the Bible to make theological points.
Right.
So,
I love that you brought this up as a theological string that you're pulling, because there's some overlap too with I think with just literary structure in general. And uh what you're talking about here about parallelism, it's also reminding me of another literary tactic that is used by scripture, and that's the calling back. And so I don't know if the calling back and parallelism are exactly the same thing, but while you were explaining the technique of parallelism, I was reminded of a conversation I was having on social media with the brilliant queer theologian J. Emery Johnson.
mm,
And we were talking about, as theologians do in their spare time when they get on social media, we were talking about the origins of Lucifer. And we were discussing how the modern rendering of Lucifer is not entirely scripturally accurate, how there's a mistranslation involved. And one interesting thing that Dr. Johnson brought up was that. when Lucifer is directly referenced, um, the author is actually trying to make a callback to the Genesis story, to the creation story in Genesis, and link the concept of Lucifer to the serpent. I'm afraid I can't get into more detail or articulate this any better than what I've already said, but just as a technique, um,
Mm,
it's interesting in how that fits in with what you're talking about, parallelism and the way the story of Midsummer is told. Because when during the interview in the bonus feature that comes with the Apple TV version, when one of the actors said, "This is not a movie that foreshadows, this is a movie that lives in the moment," I was really thinking about what that means, and not in a bad way. I was just really curious by that statement. And I think I understand it better now that we're looking, uh, by looking at that through a theological lens. Because what happens in scripture really is, if you put yourself in the shoes of the folks in scripture, it really is moment to moment, and it's only when you distance yourself that you start to see the parallels, that you start to see the callbacks that are there. You know, the biggest parallel, or maybe it's a callback, I don't know, and it's hotly debated in theology, is whether the Hebrew Testament prophesied the coming of Christ, or if it's a parallel, or if there's a callback happening.
mhm,
Um, and I think that fits in really well with the way the story is being told in Midsummer. You know, like,
mhm,
was it all meant to be? Or, you know, what if these are just parallel things? And by saying that these are parallel events, I don't think is diminishing the meaning of them
mhm.
at all. For me, and I don't know if you feel the same way, Pace, to tell a story where these parallels are evident is, for me, as a theologian, as a person of faith, as an active Catholic, it's really demonstrative of a divine presence of God.
Yeah, yeah. I would agree with that too. And Jay Johnson, by the way, uh, friend of mine as well, formerly my advisor from
Yeah.
my program, my PhD program. But interesting factoid about Jay Johnson, is a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. So I wonder, would he be
Ooh,
willing to guest on our podcast someday down the road? Maybe we can do an episode on Buffy or something. That would be fun.
that
But
would be fun. Especially, Pace, since you don't like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Ooh, ooh,
yeah.
ooh, ooh. You knew I was gonna go there. You knew I was gonna go there. Ooh,
Yep,
ooh,
yep.
ooh,
I'll
ooh,
suffer through it
ooh,
for no, I'm
ooh,
kidding.
ooh,
There
ooh,
are things I like about it, but, um,
ooh. Well, there are definitely some theological pulls we can make from that show for
for
sure.
sure, like, when she dies for the
Yeah.
like, in a very messianic way
Yeah.
and then comes back to life,
Even
but
even
any
even her parting words before she died were messianic. She
yeah.
literally says to her sister, "Live for me."
Mhm.
Like, okay, you've been reading Jesus' story a little bit, haven't you? So, yeah, no, it would be really great to have Dr. Johnson on here. He's absolutely brilliant.
Interesting, yeah. So, hopefully you're listening to this podcast, Dr. Johnson, but, yeah, but reach out to us, or we'll reach out to you more likely, and get you on here.
Mhm.
This will be fun. So anyway, I that's it for my theological stuff, unless you want to say anything else. But if not, we can get into rating this film, and you can tell me. I'm
Mhm.
very curious how you would rate it.
So yes, I'm ready to get into the rating. Uh, so technical question, Pace. Uh, how do you want me to rate the movie? Do you want me to combine my first and second viewing? Do you want separate responses to each viewing? What do you think?
I think I'm curious in where you're standing now. And
Where
you
I'm
can
standing
maybe
now.
you can
Mhm.
say you can perhaps reference saying the first time I would have rated it this, but now I'm rating it now. That's what but I'm really curious where you're feeling now.
Yeah. What's our scale, by the way? Since
Oh, that's a good question.
We're
Since
not
we're
in the
still
Halloween
season
universe anymore, right?
Yeah, since we're still season 1, we could do jack-o'-lanterns, but that
Yeah.
seems a little boring. Maybe we
You
can
think so?
do, um, people stuffed in bear suits out of 10.
that that
Or is
that
that too
is
morbid?
that no, it's not morbid. It's just it's not as interesting as a jack-o'-lantern.
Okay, we'll stick with jack-o'-lanterns for season 1 then. Do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. It'll be our homage to our humble beginnings as a Halloween podcast, right?
Yeah. Season 2,
uh,
since we're doing a different franchise, which we've already talked about, but we're not gonna reveal yet. Maybe we'll have something different for that one, but for this one, we'll do jack-o'-lanterns.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, let's let the jack-o'-lanterns live for a couple more episodes. Uh, so where I am now is, whew, I don't know. Is this a critical rating or is it a mood rating? Maybe it's a little
However
bit of
you
both.
want.
It might be a little bit of both. 9 jack-o'-lanterns out of 10.
Nice.
I am not fully confident enough to give it the full 10, and I think that might be because it's horrifying in a way that's not entirely entertaining.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, 9 jack-o'-lanterns out of 10. The first viewing after I saw it with you, I definitely might have rated it a 6,
Oh,
maybe
wow.
even a 5, somewhere in the middle. But with a better understanding and seeing the complete director's vision,
Mhm.
uh, yeah, final score 9 jack o' lanterns out of 10. What about you, Pace?
I was also thinking 9 out of 10. I really, really like this movie. I'm tempted to bump it up to a 10 out of 10, but, like,
Mm,
it's just there are a few kind of inconsistencies and questions I have wondering about it, like, so I'm not quite sure I'm ready to give it a 9 out of 10, kinda like you were saying, but it's about as close to a perfect horror film as I think as one can get, especially with the mood like we're talking about is just so unsettling throughout.
yeah.
Um, so I would say that. Do you have a favorite kill?
I was gonna ask you if we are gonna do a favorite kill because, like, it seems like a thing that's more appropriate to the Halloween movies. But I was also thinking, people did die in this movie, and also I was also thinking about how Ari Aster was originally presented with this idea as a straightforward, conventional slasher movie.
Mhm.
That being said, I would love to answer the question of favorite kill, and much like with many of the Halloween movies, uh, there are some good kills to pick from. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's morbid or anything, but we've been doing this podcast long enough that it's
yeah.
completely normalized to me now.
No need to apologize. It's meant horror is meant to be cathartic and entertaining, so no need to apologize for enjoying a kill on screen. We're not actually going out and killing real people. Or
Right.
are we?
I
Or
mean,
are we? No, I'm kidding.
what what Pace does after the podcast is none of my business. So I'm just kidding. Um, So I think the obvious question, obvious answer to this question would be seeing Chris burnt up in a bear
Right.
suit. Um, but I would say that my favorite kill, because I thought in a way it was kind of clever, was the way Josh was killed off. Um, so first of all, he's not the first person who dies, even though he's black. Hallelujah. Um, so he dies as a result of his dedication to his project. And he is so devoted to his project that he transgresses ethics and decides to take pictures of their sacred scripture, even though Father Ulf said no. Um, and Josh dies when the Oracle, slams him with a mallet, uh, but Josh doesn't recognize that it's the Oracle because the Oracle is wearing dead Mark's face.
I know, right?
And then um to top it all off, we later find out that Josh is buried, or maybe it was just his leg, but his leg is sticking out of one of the gardens. And Pace, I wanted to ask you this question. Was that garden the one that Pele was tending to when Josh and Chris came up to him asking if Pele had any updates on whether or not the elders said they could write about the community? And then Pele, like, either Chris or Josh asked Pele, "Hey, what are you up to?" And Pele is just like poking at the garden, and he says in a kind of passive aggressive, irritated voice. Oh, tending to a garden.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if that's where
I
that's
don't
where
know. That's a
Josh,
very good question. Yeah.
right, is that where Josh's leg ultimately ended up? So I that's my kill because it's I thought it was kind of clever.
Yeah, something we didn't get into in this film, but there's a lot of like religious stuff that's hinted at but never fully explained, which I like. But the
Mhm.
fact that there's a leg sticking out of the garden kind of as a way to ward off the evil and hope for good crops, and then there's with the person being drowned as a way to ward off the evil in the water and perhaps
Mhm.
hope for fresh water or for rain or something. So it seems like there's some sort of intentionality to the way these people
Yeah.
are killed. It's not just happenstance. But yeah,
Well, and
oh please.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I do want to squeeze in that that is what differentiates Midsummer as a final product versus how it was originally pitched to Ari Aster, because he takes these horror slasher tropes and makes them into this commentary about community, about spirituality, belief, grief, codependency, and he sort of like adds this art house sheen to it that is not, it's not a snobby movie. Like I think it's an approachable movie. If you just take the time to just watch it and give it a shot, a chance to say what it's saying. Like I have never seen these tropes of horror done in such a unique way, because if you take out all of the cult stuff, it really is just a bunch of young people getting offed one by one. I mean, we
Mhm.
don't also I'm not clear on whether or not Mark was still a virgin, but he definitely got killed off before he was able to have the sex that he kept wanting.
Yep. And for pissing on a tree too, like what
Uh,
what an American asshole thing to do. Like I
for
definitely like
real.
how they're kind of he's out of all the group, he's definitely depicted as like the most assholish American one of them all. Like just no concern for the
Yeah.
cultures or traditions of this place. But
How, like, exactly, how can you not assume that the entire site that you're on is sacred?
right,
That's baffling to me. But it's also an American thing. Much
yeah,
like as when Pele pointed out to Chris, who asked if he could join in the dance, and Pele says, "Well, you can just jam yourself in on in there. You're an American."
yep, I like that line. That was great. So
Yeah.
um I guess
You're
okay, so I guess I need to answer my favorite kill. So my
yeah.
favorite kill, of course, as also said, is the very cathartic, amazing ending to Christian being burned in the bear suit. But since that one is not but since Joe also kind of had a second favorite kill, since that's the predictable one that I think everyone likes, my
Yeah.
second favorite kill is the one where we see the two elderly people jump off the cliff because
Oh.
that is really the first like gore in the entire film, and it is just so like you know it's gonna happen, but you're not sure how much is gonna show. And
Yeah.
then it kind of at first it shows it kind of from a long shot, but then they kind of do this close up, and you just see like
Yeah.
the face being obliterated on the rock is so disturbing and gross and sickening,
Right.
and everything I love and also hate about horror all in one. And so that is just I guess the most shocking kill, even though it's going to happen, and just really well done from a special effects and visual way too. So that
Yeah.
would be what I
Well,
pick.
I was thinking about the special effects part in the most interesting place. It wasn't them on the cliff. It wasn't the people falling off the cliff. It was when the old man survives and he looks at his leg and it's next to him because it broke off. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I'm thinking about the makeup and costume design and all of that went into making that little image. My reaction to this kill, the kill of the pair, it was kind of like in a liminal space, because on the one hand, I know I'm watching a horror movie that's doing this for shock value, because that's what horror movies do, right? But I was also thinking, and I feel kind of wrong, but I was also thinking this is the most elegantly shot kill I have ever seen. I literally thought to myself that that little scene alone, that sequence, the ritual suicide, it could be its own video clip on the sixth floor of the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. You know where they keep like the video installations and they show like all those, wild and bizarre videos that are artsy fartsy. I think it would make a perfect fit on the sixth floor.
I agree 100%.
Or for you being a Washingtonian at the Hirshhorn.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I now that the Smithsonian's are slowly opening, I want to go back there. I haven't been there in probably 5 or 6 years. I miss it.
Ooh, yeah. I had gay romantic drama at the Hirshhorn once, but that's
Me
another podcast for
too.
another
Oh
day.
my god. Now we need to hear each other's stories off air because I went on a first date with somebody to the Herschel Museum, which is such a weird place to go on a first date to, by the way. But I
It's.
did.
I want to hear your story. It's just a weird place for gay drama to erupt, and yet it did. It did.
Yeah.
Happy Pride, you all. Anyway.
Okay. Well, I guess our next movie, one of Joe's picks,
Ooh, yes. And it's also the oldest one that we're doing, right? The furthest
for this
back.
first season. Yep.
Yeah.
Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, 1960.
Eat, 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 eat.
I might, yes, I might rewatch the really weird 1998 Psycho remake.
Why?
Um, just in my prep for this, I don't know. I'm on the
Right.
fence, but it's free
Right.
streaming on
Right.
Peacock, so maybe I'll watch it. I don't know.
I'm gonna take a page from the spicy takes that you've been doing in honor of Pride Month, and oh, y'all should see Pace's social media. Their posts are public. They're set to
Many
public,
of them,
aren't
not
they?
all, but most are. Yeah,
Well, the spicy takes are set to public,
many, but
and
yeah. There are
and
a few that are friends only just because they're a little too spicy, but most
sure,
are
sure.
most of the spicy are public.
And so Pesos decided that, with Pride Month to just go all out in celebrating Pride by, critiquing the strange lives of, non-queer people. But also, our community, is not immune to critique. And you mentioning that you might want to watch the shot-for-shot remake of Psycho reminds me of how I think Gus Van Sant should no longer be a thing. He should have never been a thing. I think Hollywood needed one gay guy director who was the bare minimum of good to prop him up as saying, hey, here's a gay guy director. I know, what a bitchy thing to say. I said what I said.
Love it. Oh my god, I have opinions. Come back next week for for more of these spicy opinions. Okay. Well, are we ready for our outro then?
I think we're ready to call it a night. Thanks for joining us, y'all.
Yep. Well, that's it for our show. Our theme music was by Matt May, who also edited this episode. Horror Nerds at Church releases every Thursday. Please comment, rate, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media, Facebook and Instagram at Horror Nerds at Church, and Twitter at HNAC Pod for all the latest updates about upcoming films, news, and other announcements. Until next time, if your boyfriend is as shitty as Christian, break the fuck up with him. Come on. You can do so much better. You're a queen. I believe in you.
Or, shove him into a bear costume made from the freshly killed corpse of a bear and burn him in a temple.
Either one. Either one. Heard it here, folks. Joe is saying that you can either of those are acceptable ways to deal with. No, please don't kill people. We're not going to advocate for that. But yes.
Yeah, please. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
If
We're
you
good
are
queers.
part of a cult, then go for it. Like if that's your thing in Scandinavia, but
Yeah, I know. Oh my goodness. Do you think Rose Nyland knows about what's been going on in her homeland of Scandinavia? Completely different podcast.
Well, she probably does. I wouldn't even be surprised if that's one of those St. Olaf stories that we haven't heard yet.
Saint
There was
Olaf.
there's a St. Olaf story about somebody being a serial killer, wasn't there? I
Yes,
swear
there was. I know the whole joke.
Yeah.
But another podcast for another time, right? All right, thanks
Okay.
y'all.
Yep, thanks. Bye.
Bye.